and welcome to Politics London. One story dominates the news this weekend: the tragic murder of the Conservative MP, Sir David Amess. Hello, good morning. I'm Samantha Simmons. I'm joined for the duration of the show by Paul Scully, Conservative MP for Sutton and Cheam, who is Minister for London, and by Rupert Huck, Labour MP for Ealing Central and Acton. Very good morning to you both. Thanks for being here today. And as ever, if you'd like to join in the conversation at home, do follow us at BBC London News. Now, of course, the main story this weekend, the death of Conservative MP for Southend West, Sir David Amess. Now, Rupert, I know that you were with Sir David just on Wednesday evening. Your reflections on the man?
I mean, just the whole chain of events is incomprehensibly shocking and unbelievably sad, because he was such a nice chap. And, you know, I knew him a bit since 2015, because he's the kind of cheery person that always had a smile, always would say hello to you. But over the last week, I served on a parliamentary delegation led by him. And so I kind of saw him every day for a week, close up, and you really get to know someone then. And extraordinary man, such good people skills, such a pleasant, honourable, dedicated to his constituents bloke. And, you know, last time I saw him was actually at the baggage reclaim on Wednesday night. And before that, within the trip, you know, kids are missing you and whatever. I remember being on a video call to my son. I was next to him and I said to David, you know, my boy's very naughty, tell him to be good at school. And, you know, he took the phone and was talking to my boy. Other people wouldn't have done that sort of thing. And the last thing he said is, look after that boy of yours for me. He's a good lad. So it's just really painful. I mean, we always say because MPs, although it looks like we have an adversarial chamber, you have a face-off type situation, and on these programmes you set us up against each other, we're really sort of friends underneath it. We all want the best for our constituents. And he really was the best of all parliamentary traditions. You know, Paul and I, we get on very well. Before the cameras were rolling after it, we'll chat. But, you know, with this one, I think just because I saw him so recently, it just seems even more raw and painful. And it's just such a senseless killing, you know, to be maimed at your surgery, to be slain at your surgery. It's not a one-off anymore, is it? I mean, I've seen this twice now in my parliamentary career. Both of us have, Joe Cox and now him, and I just hope something lasting comes out of it. But what a nice man, and what a huge loss to Southend. I mean, even on the trip, he had his Make Southend a City face mask. He was pulling out for all these international dignitaries. A week ago, we were at the International Labour Organisation talking about trade union rights, workers' rights. He had that.
The true champion for Southend, absolutely. And Paul, you also knew him.
Yeah, I did. I mean, how fantastic that he's taken the Southend becoming a city as a global campaign now, I was going to say. And what Rupert was saying was really interesting, because what you said just before camera was when he was with her at the baggage reclaim, you were last to have your bags up, and he stayed, he made sure you were okay, that was the sort of measure of the man. He always looking after other people, looking out for other people. He chaired a lot of debates in Parliament, so he got involved in a lot of different topics, watched the debates, participated in so many debates himself. He changed the law a number of times. He really influenced government from his backbench role. Shows the power that you don't need to be a minister, you don't need to be on some conveyor belt career path to actually make a difference for your constituents and for your country, whether it's about endometriosis, whether it's about animal welfare, all of those kind of issues, and of course Southend as a city. But I think what Rob was absolutely right to talk about, you know, the lessons that we need to learn from him, because, you know, David was a fantastic man, Joe Cox was a fantastic woman, but to deify them is the wrong lesson to learn from what happened to both of them, because actually one thing I think that spooked so many of our colleagues, as well as losing a great friend, is it was a lottery. Actually, it could have happened to 650, any one of 650. It was because of the relative randomness of the attack.
We'll talk more about that shortly, but thank you both for your reflections on Sir David. Well, a 25-year-old man, Ali Harvey Ali, has been arrested and detained under the Terrorism Act until next Friday. Let's take a look at some of the reaction from the dreadful events in Southend West. Joey Thomas has more.
The fatal stabbing of Sir David Amess on Friday has sent shockwaves through the constituency of Southend West and across the country, triggering conduct their weekly political surgeries, meeting their constituents face to face. As senior politicians, the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition, paid tribute to Sir David in Leigh-on-Sea yesterday, the Home Secretary delivered a defiant message that politicians would not be cowed.
We cannot be cowed by any individual or any motivation, people with motives who stop us from functioning to serve our elected democracy.
But the Tory MP Tobias Ellwood, who had intervened in the terrorist attack that claimed the life of PC Keith Palmer in Westminster in 2017, took a different position.
I would recommend that no MP has a direct surgery until, you can move to Zoom. There's other ways. You can actually achieve an awful lot over the telephone. You can get things moving far faster than having to wait for the surgery date as well.
With the issue of MP's safety the overriding concern, it has emerged that Sir David had been warned by a constituency worker that he needed to be more mindful of his security.
I used to go out on the doorsteps on the cold, dark nights in the rain, and I used to be a bodyguard many years ago, and I said, David, you should have somebody with you on these things. It's not safe.
In the aftermath of Friday's tragic events, the debate over how to balance safety with the vital role of MPs meeting their constituents will dominate conversations in the coming weeks and months.
Now, of course, the issue of MP security is at the forefront of the debate this morning. We're joined by Simon Morgan, security consultant and former Met Close Protection Officer. Simon, welcome to you. Thanks very much for being with us. Just how vulnerable are MPs and what can be done to make them safer?
They're certainly on the risk register because, by the very nature of politics, it can be quite divisive. People sit very much on maybe kind of two or three sides with the political divide, and therefore that naturally brings people into conflict with others. But with regards to actually going to this level, this is extremely rare. I know we've had cases in the past with Joe Cox, but certainly an attack on an MP is extremely rare.
Of course, there is going to be a wider debate about what happens going forward. Tobias Ellwood has said that he doesn't think MPs should be conducting their surgeries face-to-face for the time being. Do you think that would be wise?
I think there's going to have to be a response to this, and people are going to have to look at their own safety. I mean, with regards to an open democracy, it's very much part and parcel of an MP who wants to go and meet their constituents as much as the constituents want to meet their MP. You can look at reducing the risk and therefore putting mitigation in place, and Zoom does afford us that. But again, I think by the very nature of kind of MPs and the role they play and the time that people want to spend with them and discuss their issues, people do want to do it face to face, but we have to look at how we reduce that risk and put mitigation in place so that they can go about ultimately what is their job safely.
Okay, we'll stay with us, Simon. Let's put that to Rupert and to Paul. Rupert, how do you feel today about your personal security? Do you feel more vulnerable, and what would you like to see change?
I mean, I'd like to think lightning doesn't strike twice, but I mean, at the same time, there's a worry there could be copycat attacks. People have seen this, they might be getting funny ideas that, oh, this is the way to get on TV. I held my in-person advice surgery on Friday. It was from 4 to 6, so immediately after the news had broken. And my mind was on what was going on, to be honest, and the phone kept pinging. I texted our police before, because again, I feel with these things, the initial reaction is something must be done. So after the Joe Cox, we were all advised to have appointment-only surgeries, which is what this was, and to let the police know. And because I've been out of practice, I didn't do one since March 2020. This was only the 4th, so I did text my police to say this is where I'll be, and got the office to email the names and addresses of the people coming. And then 4 coppers turned up, which I hadn't expected. And I said, look guys, this is excessive, can you go and catch some criminals? I just was making you aware. So we've got to have that right balance. I think sensible precautions. But at the same time, when people say, let's carry on as normal, it sounds a bit macho and bravado, like, oh, I won't let it deter me.
Yeah.
We need a mix of both.
Paul, obviously a lot of MPs today want to keep those doors of democracy very much open, but how do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a matter of balance, as Rupert said, because I will be carrying on as normal, but with an absolute, background thought on safety. So I do my appointment-only surgeries that I do in my office, where I've got panic buttons that were installed after Joe Cox murder, but I also do face-to-face drop-ins, but they tend to be in supermarkets, cafes. I did one on Thursday in a cafe when I was outdoors on a high street. It's busy, there's lots of people around, and so you try to reduce risk, but also want to be approachable. So it's getting the balance right. We do need to be out there because some people have got really sensitive issues. So actually, it's looking at the paperwork, it's consulting them. Actually, at some very low ebbs, getting the balance right is important.
Simon, do you think the time has come to perhaps install metal detectors at MP surgeries to frisk people when they come in? What needs to be done to make sure they're all safe?
Again, it's, as both your guests have said, it's striking that balance so that people still have access, but you have control over that access. And yes, you can put in a search regime, but somebody has to be there to kind of deal with that. I mean, a lot of the cases, really, it's about a communication piece and having that two-way flow of information between the MPs and law enforcement to understand what is going on at that particular time. And certainly some of the mitigation that's already in place with regards to putting in scheduled meetings kind of with your MPs. So if there is someone that they're uncertain about, then people can vet that process. But there's lots of mitigation that can take place. It's just getting that right balance and understanding what each individual MP will need according to the constituency that they're in, because it'll be very much on a threat and risk basis, because what fits for one MP in one particular constituency will not fit for another.
Okay, Simon Morgan, thanks very much for joining us today on the programme. Thank you. Well, let's go now to Leon C for the latest. We can cross over to the BBC's Charlotte Rose, who is at the scene. Charlotte, welcome to you. We saw a candlelit vigil there yesterday evening. What's the mood there this morning?
Hi Samantha, well I'm here at Our Lady of Lourdes and St Joseph in Leon C. This morning the congregation have been saying prayers for Sir David, his family and his friends. He was attacked at Belfair's Methodist Church, which is just under 2 miles away from where I'm standing, and he died there less than 48 hours ago. There is a palpable sense of both shock and sorrow in this community for an MP who was well known and well liked across all sides of the political spectrum. One of the things that I'm hearing this morning is just the sheer sense of incredulity that this could have happened here. One woman who was waiting to go into the church said, "I just can't believe that something like that could take place here." The thing to know about Sir David is that he was a very hands-on MP. He absolutely loved Southend and the people in it. It was a deep passion of his. He'd spoken more than 100 times in Parliament, calling for Southend to become a city. It was a matter very close to his heart. He also cared deeply about animal welfare and about services for older people. He used to hold a birthday party for centenarians of the town every year. Those are just some of the things that people will have been remembering when they gathered last night for that candlelit vigil, to come together and to mourn the loss of a man who meant so much to this town.
Okay, Charlotte Rose in C on Lee, thank you. Your final thoughts as we round up this conversation about these horrific events, Paul?
I mean, Sir David was such a lovely man, and as we've been seeing by cross-party tributes to him, in terms of the security response that we've just been discussing, it is about getting the balance right. We need to be kept connected to the people that put us in place and trust us to represent them, but we're not. On the other hand, we're not emergency firefighters or police officers, or we can't equate ourselves with those. So we shouldn't overblow the risk, because we live in our constituencies and our boroughs as well. So it's getting that balance is so important.
Yeah, no one wants to live a bulletproof existence behind security grills. I mean, then that would cut the link between the constituent and the MP, which is so fundamental to our democracy. But at the same time, we do have to have sensible measures put in place. A lot of times people don't take MPs seriously. It's an unpopular job. We're seen as always snails in the trough and on the take. So yeah, mixing the two, and something has to be lasting. Because again, with Joe Cox, for about a week I was texting the police to say where I'd be, and then wore off. So I think, yeah, lasting change has to happen.
Okay, so we need to see something long-term put in place to make you all feel safer and be literally safer as well. Thank you both very much. Now, the Mayor's plans for a huge expansion of the capital's ultra-low emission zone could have a drastic and discriminatory impact on disabled people. That's according to campaigners. The scheme comes into effect a week tomorrow. We have spoken to disabled voices in the following report. One Londoner who says the mayor is breaching disabled Londoners' human rights, and another who's struggling to get into central London for hospital appointments. Jessica Ewer has this.
Lucy has narcolepsy.
Essentially, my brain isn't able to control when I'm asleep when I'm awake, so I will fall asleep uncontrollably during the day, and I also have something called cataplexy, which is the involuntary loss of muscle control, so I do rely a lot on taxis to get to where I need to go.
She lives right next to the tube, but can't get to it because it isn't accessible.
Literally, I can see the display telling me when the next train is from my bedroom window, but I cannot get to the platform.
She often needs a taxi for hospital appointments in central London.
So at this point, you've been waiting for 15 minutes?
Yeah, but anything past that could be quite painful depending on kind of the day. So it's said it's not been able to fulfil the journey, so this is when I just go back to the beginning and start again. When they realise I want to go into central London, then they essentially say no because they don't want to have to pay the fare. It's already difficult enough for disabled Londoners to get to where they need to be because a lot of public transport is very inaccessible. So the fact that they've gone ahead with one measure without considering what they need to do to stop that from negatively affecting disabled people is very frustrating.
It's going to have a drastic impact upon up to 250,000 disabled people in London when it gets implemented. We believe our rights are being violated, our Human Rights and the Equalities Act. There's been an exemption for all diesel black cabs in London, and he's also approved the 4-lane Silvertown tunnel. So for them to say that by giving the same reasonable adjustments for the congestion charging for blue badge holders, there's going to be too much pollution is completely hypocritical. So we've launched a crowdfunder in regards to what we believe is direct discrimination upon disabled people from ULEZ. And the idea is to raise £5,000 for the legal opinion of an eminent QC. Lots of disabled people are going to have to choose between heating and eating. I don't understand why the Mayor of London is trying to get disabled people to add another aspect to that and pay a wheelchair tax in relation to his ULEZ.
Well, we did invite the Mayor's Deputy for ULEZ expansion to join us, but she was unavailable. So let me just read out a statement from the Mayor's office. It says, Sadiq is doing everything in his power to stop Londoners breathing air so filthy that it damages children's lungs and causes thousands of premature deaths every year. The impact of the ULEZ expansion on disabled and older people, including blue badge holders, was fully analysed and addressed in the integrated impact assessment and in the consultation for the scheme as part of the Equality Act requirements. So, Rupo, surely though these efforts to bring down pollution in the capital shouldn't come at the expense of disabled residents?
Well, I mean, the bigger picture is we have a climate emergency, and the World Health Organization only this week sort of changed their limits. So we have a moral and legal duty that people can breathe clean air. You know, kids are growing up with stunted lungs in our capital. There are thousands of premature deaths, as you said. Even I think the CBI has said that if we sort all this out, 3 million working days won't be lost anymore. Because if you think about the knock-on effects, it's hospitalisation, social care, your bigger NHS bills, and we had cleaner air throughout the pandemic, so we need to safeguard that because, you know, less people were driving. So
these disabled people being discriminated against, why can't they be exempt?
What I would say is, well, there are actually exemptions up to 2025 if you're registered disabled or registered disabled passenger. So there are bits and pieces there, and there are also 2 separate scrappage schemes where you can get up to £2,000 for a replacement vehicle, and this is about replacing vehicles that are spreading noxious air. To be honest, 80% of existing cars on the road, my car is not a new one, but it's ULEZ compliant, are already there, and you don't have to have a brand new car. I think any car from 2005 onwards, a lot of those are within the new scope. So I think we need to think of the bigger picture.
Are disabled residents being discriminated against?
Inevitably, the 20% of cars that are left that are paying the ULEZ are going to be likely for people with the lowest pay. People can't afford to replace their vehicles as often. It says it's a blunt tool, and to be able to expand it in the way that it's expanding at the moment will hit people like Kush and other disabled users particularly hard. So we do need to have a bit of breathing space for them, because the whole point about whether you're trying to improve the environment, air pollution, and indeed tackle the climate change, you need to take people with you. So you need to actually make sure there are alternatives for them, including the scrappage scheme, including better public transport, before you start taking the rug away from them.
Paul, thank you. Now, let's talk about food banks, because food bank use has soared in London and is expected to reach unprecedented levels in the wake of the government's cut in universal credit. London is the only region in the UK where the number of parcels distributed has more than doubled compared to the previous financial year. Helen Drew has more.
You have cereal here, pasta, milk, canned food, tomato sauce, chickpeas, fish, a little bit more fish, and peas, tea bags, and juice. So here you're looking at one adult and two children's food for up to 3 days.
And it's worth about £20.
£20, yeah. £20, and people queue up for this for sometimes over an hour in the rain.
Food banks are a lifeline for many, and at Bow Food Bank in the East End, they're struggling to keep up with a surge in demand.
It's incredible how much the demand has increased over the last year. I mean, we keep revising our figures, but it's at least over 500%. To think that we are surrounded by some of the richest parts of London, there is colossal amounts of wealth, literally a mile down the road, yet you have people that can't afford to buy it. People will go hungry. It's as simple as that. People will go hungry less than a mile away from the City of London if we don't raise enough money to feed them.
The empty shelves here are in part due to the recent fuel crisis, as well as giving out more food parcels than ever.
We're here before they open, as many people still feel there's a stigma associated with food poverty, and the organisers don't want the people who are coming here to feel uncomfortable when they're trying to collect the food they so desperately need.
Across London, demand is up. One of the biggest food banks is the Trussell Trust, where in the last financial year over 420,000 provisions per person were given out. That's more than double the 204,000 parcels of the previous year. Food prices are rising steadily for everyone.
Do you know people who struggle to buy their food on a weekly basis?
Yeah, I definitely have at some point. You know, I lost my job during COVID, and, you know, there was a few months where I was struggling to kind of make ends meet.
Well, I absolutely know that there's food poverty in the area, and there's food poverty all throughout Britain.
Yeah, I just feel like it's getting really bad, it's getting out of hand, and I hope something can be done about it.
One thing some say would help is for the government to reinstate the £20 weekly increase in universal credit, which recently ended.
The universal credit uplift, £20 a week, £1,000 a year. For families on a very limited income, that makes a difference between being able to have a reasonable shopping bag full of stuff to feed your kids and having to put things back on the shelves, hang around at 9:30 in the evening in the supermarket. A lot of people do that for the end of lines, you know, the ones by their sell-by date. Sort of thing that people like me may do it. We may say, "Wait, that's great. I can get that sandwich which has got 1 day left on it for £1 off." But for some people, that's how they have to live, you know. And it's quite a lot of people in my borough. It's tragic, I would say criminal, that people are driven to food banks these days, but that's become custom and practice.
These shelves may be partly empty, but the real problem is going to be how sparse the shelves are in people's homes.
Helen Drew reporting now. Well, I'm joined now by Melanie Rochwood from the Food Bank and Crisis Service First Love Foundation. Welcome to you. Thanks very much for being with us. Tell us a bit more about your food bank, because it works in a slightly different way, doesn't it? You're trying to get people off using these food banks, even though you are giving them food.
Yes, absolutely. Our organisation is about 10% focused on giving the food support and 90% on the person-centred, more holistic, multidisciplinary approach type support that we provide to tackle the underlying issues of poverty. So it's a more strategic approach, and we started 10 years ago as a food bank solely, and quickly realised that it needs to be wider than that in order to get to the underlying problems and move them on in a meaningful way.
And what changes in demand have you seen recently?
So we are seeing an increase, just like pure food banks have seen. But I would hasten to add that the fears around taking away the UC uplift, that's just one of the problems. There's a whole swathe of people advocates who were never touched by the uplift in UC. So the issues are much wider than that. There are also hundreds of thousands of people who are benefit capped. Again, they won't have benefited by that uplift. So it's a big concern that the uplift is going, but it's actually far wider than that. And it really points to the fact that the system needs addressing, the welfare system needs radical reform, and we need, as a nation, to stop looking at food emergency support as the only way forward. We need to be far more strategic in providing a wider range of support.
Paul, as Minister for London, this growing dependence on food banks by Londoners, it must break your heart.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, every individual story is an individual person that's suffering, an individual family. But Melanie's absolutely right that we have to take a strategic view on this. And so, you know, the coverage tends to be about food bank demands or the UC uplift, whereas actually if you take a strategic view and you start targeting some of that support to the lowest paid, the hardest hit, which is what the Chancellor is doing with their household allowance and other measures, and also how we can get people back into work, how we using our people within the Department of Work and Pensions, how we can get people to work more hours, encouraging them, because there's 1 million vacancies across the country, how we can match those up with people. That's the approach, this holistic view.
But it shouldn't be down to charities like Melanie's to have to rely on donations from people and others who support people trying to get back into work to help people.
No, not solely. And this is what I mean. But the holistic view is exactly the position that the government is taking. But clearly, there are always going to be charities doing fantastic work like Melanie's, and so there will be a place for them. But we shouldn't be solely dependent on that.
It's Dickensian, this, isn't it?
It just sounds like the third sector charities are picking up the tab for the government's economic mismanagement and for what is a state failure. I mean, a food bank is a place where they give a number of emergency parcels as a last resort. You need to be referred. I used to be a referring agent. I was given some vouchers to give out at surgeries for people in need. It's not a sort of free-for-all. It's quite a, we need to give people dignity as well. So it's a thing of last resort. And the fact that they've actually, use has quadrupled since 2015 is a shameful thing. In our country, nobody should have to go to a food bank at all. And the £20 uplift that's going, I mean, Universal Credit had a lot of problems anyway, and it was below par. And for that to happen on top of all this is a kick in the teeth.
We don't tell us where the money's coming from, whether the 6 billion
Let me just ask Melanie for her thoughts as well, please, on what you've just heard. Melanie.
Well, being at the front line, we see the issues up close, and we see that we really do need to work more joined up. We're hoping to actually put ourselves out of business. That's the ultimate aim. We shouldn't have to exist. While we do, we're putting all our efforts into looking at how the system is broken, and we're ready to talk with central government, local government, whoever we need to work as allies, not to point the finger, but really show where the problems are and show scientifically where things are letting the most vulnerable be let down.
Melanie, there we must leave it. Thank you very much. I'm sure that Paul and Rupert will be on hand to discuss with you. That is all we have time for this week. My thanks to Rupert and to Paul. Thank you very much for your reflections on Sir David Amess. Thanks for joining us. See you again next week. Bye for now.